I have worked with producers who expected that they would set the tone of the show and that I would follow along, and that has not worked out.
A fierce intellect with a PhD from Oxford University and a penchant for monologues on her news programme, Maddow has recast the news business in the US. She was the first out lesbian to front a primetime news bulletin, piling on the ratings, and then, faced with the emergence of Donald Trump, adopted an openly hostile position towards him.
I mean, this would be a very funny movie if this were about something fake. It would be great if this was fake, but this is us now.
Her preoccupation with the idea that Trump and Putin were in cahoots led Sean Hannity of Fox News to denounce Maddow as the chief conspiracy theorist.
Now, there was also the time that Maddow theorized that Trump could be a gateway drug for the Ku Klux Klan. Really?
Russia and its assault on American democracy emerge as a strong theme in her new book, Blowout, which tells the story of how the richest and most destructive industry on earth, oil, has corrupted global politics. But does Maddow's journalism simply represent a lament for a type of liberal political culture that's disappeared and isn't likely to return anytime soon?
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's been a hoot to have you here.
Well, earlier Rachel Maddow joined us from New York, and we started by discussing whether President Trump was now unstoppable.
Anybody in the United States who tells you anything about politics on a 9-month lead time at this point should be committed to an insane asylum. We have learned to roll with the punches and stop predicting things in advance. I mean, all presidents, I think, are tipped to get reelected. Incumbents tend to get reelected, but I think it's going to be a long 9 months and an interesting and unpredictable 9 months between now and when we actually vote.
Now, you've covered the Trump presidency with enormous passion, commitment, one might say, not in the traditional or old-school journalistic paradigm of detachment. Do you ever worry that you might have been amplifying his message?
No. I mean, I worry about a lot of things about my job and about this era, but I almost never play the president's message at all. One of the weird things about being in American journalism at this time is that this White House, this president and his senior staff have no qualms at all about doing interviews in which they say things that are false. And so very early on in the Trump administration, I had to change my whole attitude about how I treat the administration and remarks from the president. And we stopped playing effectively the remarks of the president or broadcasting his tweets or indeed doing interviews with his officials, just because I was constantly having to clean up after them to explain that what they were saying wasn't true.
All right, well, let's attach the same perspective on the Democratic Party side and look at how they did the Iowa primary. I mean, what did you make of that? It seemed both shambolic and at the same time unlikely to produce a candidate that could actually stand a realistic chance of beating the president.
It's been difficult in Iowa, and I think that this will challenge their status as first in the nation from here on out. But among the Democratic candidates right now, mostly what they want is bragging rights and momentum, and they're all still fighting for that. It just makes New Hampshire, the next contest, all the more important for determining those this year.
It looks pretty likely, though, that Sanders is going to end up either at the top of the pile or near the top, doesn't it, this time? I mean, he's going pretty well, and knowing the UK as you do, I just wonder whether the lessons of the Corbyn candidacy in any way play into this. Is there any awareness of where it might lead the party to run with, if you like, an old school socialist in pole position?
It's interesting. The analysts of the Sanders phenomenon in Democratic politics were very frequently citing Jeremy Corbyn as an international analog before the last UK election, and then that immediately stopped as soon as Corbyn had that sort of miserable failure. And so I think now, particularly Sanders partisans reject that comparison on any number of different grounds. But I mean, I think what the Sanders campaign has to contend with most directly is that the Sanders theory of the case, the way that they say he is electable, is by arguing that his place on the ideological number line, however uncomfortable it may make establishment politicians, it is calibrated in such a way that is designed to maximize turnout, that he will bring out people who would otherwise not vote, and they will become Democratic voters, and they wouldn't vote for anybody except Sanders, and he's going to expand the size of the Democratic electorate. And that's really his electability case. That's the case he's making to the public. The problem the Sanders campaign has right now, early on, is that the turnout numbers were not up in Iowa.
Yeah, last question I do want to ask you precisely on the role of Russia. There was a phrase in your book that absolutely leapt out at me. You talked about their role during the 2016 election, forcing their dirty fingernails into our various national open wounds. Presumably you don't feel Mueller and the impeachment that have just gone by have in any sense given closure in that respect. So where does this leave the country heading into this next election? Is it wide open for further electoral interference?
It is more wide open than it has ever been. It is unfortunate and scary that the way the president's defense ended up in the impeachment process was that not only is he fine to have invited and in fact demanded that Ukraine interfere in the next election on his behalf, but he's okay to ask any country to do that as long as he's trying to get himself reelected. He can use any power that he has as president to do so. And so the threat is not only as strong as it's ever been externally, but it is more welcomed than it has ever been by this administration. And it's just something we've never had to confront before. And I don't know how it's going to play out.
Rachel Maddow, thank you so much.